Thank you, Addie. Thank you, Greg. Nicole, everybody doing a great job on everything this morning. The Beat Buddy, thank you. Much appreciated. No, we're glad you're here today as we finish up a look at Job. It is just a very quick two-part look. We don't, you can spend a lot of time in the book, and the series could get a lot longer, but just for our purposes this year, we're just hitting a couple of highlights in it. But Job had a pretty bad day. And you know it's a bad day when it costs more to fill up your car than it did to buy your car. You know it's a bad day when your twin sister forgets your birthday. My mom's a twin. Has that ever happened? No? Okay, good. You know it's a bad day when you call suicide prevention and they put you on hold. You know it's a bad day when your wife says, "Good morning, Bill," and your name is George. You know it's a bad day when the bird singing outside your office window is a vulture. You know it's a bad day when you need a bathroom scale for each foot. You know it's a bad day when you call your wife to tell her you would like to eat out tonight, and when you get home there's a sandwich on the front porch. You know it's a bad day when a fortune teller offers to refund your money. You know it's a bad day when you look at yourself in the mirror and decide you need to put on makeup, and then realize you already did. And finally, you know it's a bad day when you get a knock on the door and it's a man from the IRS who says, "I'm here to help." Job's life begins this roller coaster ride where it becomes a bad day. When we first learned of Job, he was living the American dream, or at least what we would call it. Everything was in his favor. He was a successful businessman. He was married. He had 10 kids. He was respected by those in his community. And he's rich, but most of all, he's called righteous by God. To be Job would be a very good thing at this point. But one day, and that's all it takes for anything to change, one day, life turns upside down. The bottom drops out of Job's life. His 10 kids are killed in a freak accident. His wealth and possessions are gone, either by crazy storms or by thieves. His health is taken away. His wife turns on him. If it could go wrong, it did go wrong, and it happened fast. So the question this morning is, could God have prevented the tragedy of Job's life? Or how about the tragedy of your own life? Could God have prevented your dad's Alzheimer's? Or your wife's cancer? Your son's depression? Or your daughter's high school pregnancy? Your pink slip? Or the dissatisfaction in your marriage? Or your dead-end job? Your months of lockdown and isolation? Could God have prevented these things from happening? Or at least could he bring an end to them right now? If your answer is yes, as it should be, then we're left with this question. If God can, then why doesn't he? If God can do those things, why doesn't he? If God can prevent the pain, the hurt, the loneliness, the anger, the frustration, and the emptiness, then why doesn't he do it? Well, Job found himself asking this question to some extent. In Job chapter 10, verse 2, it says, "I will say to God, do not condemn me, but tell me what charges you have against me." Let's rephrase that. God, why? That's Job's question. God, why? You know, Job is described as righteous by God, but even Job looks at himself and says, no man can be righteous before God. So Job he has no problem knowing he knows he's not perfect. There are some people who think they're perfect in God's gift to humanity. Job's not one of them. He doesn't claim that at all. He says that's the opposite. But he looks at his sin and his perceived punishment. He said, these don't add up. It doesn't make sense. And so he's asking God, why? If God is this all-powerful God of the universe, how do we explain the amount of pain in Job's life or in your own life? Why doesn't God just kick HIV, cancer, dementia, divorce, COVID, and family disputes to the curb? Why doesn't God just be done with it and we move on along a happy little life? Well, the two conclusions most people draw are either God doesn't care or God can't do it. Polytheism, pantheism, and deism teach that God got the universe created, he got the engine started, but then he walked away. He doesn't care. Then the other view was maybe clearly formulated by Harold Rabbi Kushner. As a father, his firstborn child died, and he says that he had to face the fact that either God was all-powerful but not kind, or thoroughly kind and loving but not all-powerful. And he determined that God had put self-imposed limits on him where he can't interfere in our lives in certain ways. And that's how he understands it. That might have made Kushner feel a little bit more comfortable about the situation he was dealing with, but it's not compatible with the God of the Bible. The God of the miracles and healings and other wonderful moments in the lives of people, where we see God intervene at times, and at other times, not so much. And I think this is where Job struggled. If God is this all-powerful God, why doesn't he step in and do something about it? In Job chapter 1, we learn that he lost all of his wealth, possessions, and children. In chapter 2, he loses his health and his wife's support. And if you were Job, would you feel like worshiping God? I know I wouldn't. I would be angry, indignant, and quite frankly, distant. But Job chooses to worship anyway, because Job realizes bad things are going to happen, even to good people. He doesn't understand why so much has been allowed to happen in his life. And so he's left with the question, if God can do something about it, why doesn't he? Some people are a little more brave in how they might put it. There was one Jewish Holocaust survivor who said, if this is the best God can do, maybe he should resign and let someone more competent take his place. If you've been through a trial, a severe trial, maybe you can relate to those words. When you were a kid and you were scared, who did you run to? You know, probably mom or dad or papa or grandma. As you got a little bit older, maybe a cousin or a friend from school. Or how about now? If you're scared or you're upset, who do you turn to? Is it still your parents? Is it a spouse? Is it a coworker, a friend, a fellow church member? How do you determine who you will run to? And I bet, if you really think about it, I can tell you exactly who you will run to. You will run to the person most likely to answer the phone, or answer the door, or respond to the text. Because you know exactly right now, if you pull out your phone right now and you send a text, you know who is not going to write you back. But you know who's going to write you back before you hit send, because they're always there. And you know what? That's why alcoholism, drug addiction, and pornography are so inviting, because they're always there when you call out. They're just waiting for you to say, I need you. Boom, they're there. They never fail to show up. But when friends delay, it creates a gap in the relationship. And it's hard to rely on God when it seems like God is silent, when it seems like God is distant, when it seems like he's delayed, or quite frankly, it seems like he is absent. No call, no text, no show. We make that equal no care. But then the most amazing thing happens in Job's life. God speaks. Finally, God is going to address the question, if I can, then why don't I? Now, before we get there, let me set up the story a little bit for you. After Job went through these harsh trials, his friends show up. And for a week, they sit with him in silence. I'm going to tell you right now, that is one of the best things you can ever do with anybody, is to show up. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to have the psychology down. You don't even need to know all the Bible verses. If you would just show up, it'll make all the difference in a person's life to know you care. It's called the ministry of being present. However, after a week of being there, the friends determine that they're going to impose their psychological will on Job, and it goes downhill very quickly. They essentially accuse Job of not admitting to sin in his life, which is why he's going through this trial. And if he would just admit it, then they could move on. And it's a back and forth battle. It doesn't go well. And it went on for what we presume to be many months or even a couple of years. And it's finally at that point that God speaks. Of course, this whole time, Job says, I'm going to ask God questions. I don't understand it, but when I meet God, I'm going to ask him questions. And then when God speaks, here's the very first things God says. The Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Right there, that's a pretty strong way to start a rebuttal. God's words, you ignorant, or with ignorant words. You speak to me with ignorant words. Whew. That's a pretty strong challenge. And then God says, I'm going to question you. This is not an easy moment for Job. And it's not an easy moment for us. But God is going to paint a picture as we look to answer this question, if God can, why doesn't he? The first thing God tells Job is to look up. When life seems out of control, the first thing God invites us to do is look up. Here's what God tells Job. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Can you bind the beautiful hard word? Can you lose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? This is Earth that we live on. Earth is situated in our planet's solar system. We are the Third rock from the sun, which I bet you're well aware of. We're also not a very large planet compared to the other ones. But if you zoom in a little bit further, this is a really interesting picture. So we got the sun is the big yellow orange circle there. That's the Earth right there, about the size of the red dot on the screen. Of course, compared to Jupiter and Saturn, very small. But that's our planet in comparison with our sun. So you say, man, we're pretty small. Well, it gets smaller than that. So we zoom out here, and this is our sun. This is another a star, and this is another star we know, Sirius, Pollux, Arcturus, and then there's a bigger one yet, and this is just the side of another giant star compared to our Earth's one. Let's look at another picture here to look at it this way. And so here we've got the sun, our sun right here. That's Betelgeuse. That's about the size the Earth is compared to our sun, and now our sun compared to Betelgeuse. And Betelgeuse isn't the biggest. It gets bigger. We take up a very small amount of space in space. In fact, if you look at our Milky Way galaxy, this is our position in the Milky Way galaxy. That's a pretty small spot. So within this realm right here, we have many stars, ultimately our sun and our planets. How much space do we take up in the Milky Way? I heard it described this way: put a quarter on the ground, and that's how much space we take up if that quarter represented one spot in North America. Now, we're not talking just the United States, we're talking North America, the whole continent. That's not very much space at all. Earth seems more like a speck of dust, but you can zoom out even further. The known universe that's been discovered at this point, and so our Milky Way is right there. That's the Milky Way. So if you go back, so the Milky Way, we take up that very small spot. Now that whole thing takes up a very small spot right here out of all the known universe. Hubble did a very interesting deep space zoom several years ago. What they did is they took the telescope, pointed at the sky, and they just wanted to zoom out as far as they could see. They wanted to see the end of space that we could find. And so basically the equivalent would be looking at 1 square inch of the sky and just zooming in. So a very small portion of the sky. We're going to watch this video. There's no sound to it. But just watch with me as we zoom in, and then it's going to reverse and zoom back out. So it gives you an idea of the sky with the constellations, where we're at here. And so we're going to zoom in. Those are all potential galaxies, not just solar systems like ours. Milky Ways. Pretty amazing. And then zoom out, give you an idea how far out we went and looked. So that's all these galaxies we just see. And zooming out, zooming out. All right, virtually invisible to see any of those galaxies that we zoomed all the way in on, so we keep zooming out. And now all the stars in the second square are starting to disappear. We keep zooming out. We keep zooming out. Now they're all gone, and now the stars outside that second square are disappearing. Wow. 1 square inch of the sky is what that is a literal picture of. So the question becomes, do we really show up on God's radar? I mean, goodness. Are we really significant at all? Don't you feel a little more insignificant? What does your cancer mean to this? What does your marriage problems mean to this? What does your struggles mean in this great, vast universe? Could there really be a God who cares about us when we seem so insignificant? Well, when you start to think you're insignificant, I want to tell you today that you are, in fact, very significant. I would say special, unique, and even one of a kind. Our planet is a very special planet because it has to have hundreds of variables that are just right for life to exist. Now, we looked at some of these back on October 4th of this year in the sermon series, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Go to the church website. All the sermons are listed there for you. October 4th is this particular one where we went over some of these things, so I don't want to rehash that. but I do want to talk about some different aspects today. For human life to exist, we have to have things right from the gravity to the right amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide, our distance to the sun, our placement in the solar system. All these things have to line up for life, human life as we understand it, to exist. And for it to happen by chance, it's been estimated that it would be 1 in 100 million, billion chances. What is that? That's this number right here. That's a 10 with 53 zeros behind it. How big is that number? That's what Congress spends in a day, okay? That's a lot of money, okay? No, that chances are just, they boggle the mind. It makes no sense. We live in what is called a spiral galaxy. About 60% of all galaxies are spiral. Now, when we did that zoom in and you saw the possible galaxies that exist, they say there's a possibility of about 1 to 2 trillion galaxies existing in the known universe to the best of our knowledge at this point. And you would say, well, surely, out of 2 trillion possibilities, there would be some planet like ours. The odds are in our favor, right? Well, not exactly, because there's an issue there. Only 60% are spiral, and human life could not exist in the other 40% of galaxies. And some say it could be as many as 50% are not spiral. So human life, as we understand it, is not possible in at least half of the galaxies that exist. So not only do all the details have to be right for life to exist on our planet, it has to be in a particular type of galaxy, and half of them are eliminated. Notice I didn't say that there wasn't a possibility for some type of microbial life or some other life that we haven't discovered yet. But human life, as we understand it, the conditions necessary for us to exist, they have so many special requirements, and almost half the galaxies don't even have the ability to have humans inhabit them. Not only that, but we have things like spiral arms, bulges, spheroids, that all create this spiral galaxy that are required for human life to exist. So we can easily, safely assume more than half of the galaxies could not hold human life like ours. Yet the reality is we do exist. The reality is we are here in this great vast space of all these. We've never seen anything like Earth anywhere else. We found water on planet, but not human life. We found amazing things, but never life like ours. In fact, our place in the spiral arms is important because it allows us to be protected from the asteroids that would potentially strike our planet. Jupiter and Saturn help absorb a lot of the meteors that are larger than the size of the planet Earth from striking us. And in fact, our spot within the galaxy arms allow us to view the universe. They say if we were in any other spot, we wouldn't even get this type of view to know what was out there. It's like we were set here intentionally, like this view was on purpose. You ever sat somewhere and you thought, whoever designed this never sat here? Back when I was in, I think it was high school, we got connected with another church in Springfield, and they decided to take a bus trip to Chicago to see the Cubs and Cardinals play. We were super excited, of course, we're all Cardinals fans, and so we went up there. My seat was behind a concrete pillar. Whoever designed it never sat there because I couldn't see the pitcher. I only could see the batter. And so the only good news is I didn't have to watch half the Cubs play. So that was great. I didn't have to force that. But I mean, my goodness, whoever designed this didn't set it up very well. But when you get the views that we get, it's like someone put us in this spot at this placement just so we could see the view. Our placement in the solar system is intentional. So why does God point out the heavens to Job? God is letting Job know, I've got things handled that you can't begin to imagine. It's only in the last few decades that we begin to understand what it takes for life to exist and how it's so not probable anywhere else. That's why David put it this way, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. God is telling Job, look up. The second thing God tells Job is to look around. After a brief space lesson, God spends a lot of time pointing to the animals, things Job can actually appreciate a lot more so than, before the invention of telescopes and everything. And you couldn't appreciate the skies to the extent that we can today. And what does God point out to Job? God shows him that these animals are cared for. God shows them that these animals don't have to worry about if God's going to show up. They know they're constantly being taken care of by God. God also points out to natural events like rain, wind, and snow to let Job know a lot's going on and I've got it under control. Here's what we read in Job 39. Do you know when the wild goat gives birth? Have you watched as deer are born in the wild? Do you know how many months they carry their young? Are you aware of the time of their delivery? They crouch down to give birth to their young and deliver their offspring. Their young grow up in the open fields, then leave home and never return. What is God doing? Is God shaming Job? Is God belittling Job's pain and suffering, calling it immature and stupid? No. God is giving evidence that he is taking care of life, that life is being maintained by his great power, and if he can handle things from galaxies to deer, he can handle Job too. God's telling Job, look around. See the proof of my ability. When I was in high school, I took weightlifting, and so I got to lift in weightlifting competitions. And it was really interesting because you tell the judges table, okay, I want to start off at this weight for this. So like on deadlift, I think I started at, say, 350 pounds, whatever it was. And so I tell them. I couldn't tell them, oh, I can do that, so I'm going to skip it. I couldn't do that. I could tell them the weight I could do, but then I had to demonstrate that I could actually do it. You don't get to participate in a weightlifting competition without actually lifting the weight. And God is telling Job, I'm lifting the weight. Look around. The evidence of what I can do is all around. And so let's look at some of the things God can do. What do we got here? Anybody know?
Woodpecker.
Woodpecker. I know. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, these things. We had one go after the house like crazy for years. It finally went away. But when it's hammering against a tree, it hammers at 15 times a second. 15 times a second. Its head moves twice as fast as the speed of a bullet. Think about that for a minute. It should theoretically kill itself at that speed, but here's what's happening, is between the brain and the beak is a shock absorber. And engineers would tell you we've never designed anything like it, and they actually use it as kind of a model for how they design their own shock absorbers. We look at the woodpecker, and we'd say, is God taking care of you? Obviously. How about this wonderful creation? You know what this is? It is. It is a water spider, specifically. The water spider is not a fish, but it spends a lot of its time underwater, but it can't breathe underwater. So it has this amazing thing where it takes its own webs, creates an air sac around its head, and basically it works like an external lung. And it's like a tiny scuba tank, if you will. And so it spends so much of its life underwater as a result of this way that it uses its webs. If you ask the spider, it would tell you God is taking care of me. I'm designed well. Or how about this one? We have the dragonfly. All right, I heard one person say it. Okay, very good. I was reading an interesting article, this goes back several years, that the world's leading helicopter manufacturer used the dragonfly as a model for how it designed the helicopters. They did over 2,000 computer renderings on how a dragonfly moved to design the helicopter. Very interesting. Oh, we have another one here. What do we have here? Rudolph. And what is he?
Reindeer.
Did you realize we are only 33 days away until Christmas? 33 days. And if you didn't know that, you should follow me on Facebook, because almost every day I post something about it. It's also on the church page. It's also on the church website. You have no excuse for not reading it. Get out there, read this stuff. It's really good. We're excited. But let's look at this type of reindeer that you might be a little bit more familiar with. For a long time, we couldn't figure something out about reindeer. They consumed moss. And moss is not a very nutritious type of food for any animal. In fact, every animal stays away from it except the reindeer, and they eat a lot of it. I'm told it's hard to digest. I've never tried it myself. Don't intend to start right now. But I'm just told it's not easy to break down within the system. But then, after some research, they found out that reindeer have this chemical that when they break down moss, it creates antifreeze, essentially, within the reindeer, so they can travel across the Arctic without freezing to death. They're consuming a natural form of antifreeze. So when God goes through all these animals and what they go through in life that Job can understand, and when we can use our more scientific research today and understand some of these great intricate details about life, it makes a lot more sense when Jesus says this. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? God is telling Job, look around. I've got it under control. In your out-of-control world, God is inviting you to look at what He is doing. Finally, when your life seems out of control, you need to look in. You need to look in. It's time to self-examine. What do you believe about God? When life is hard, do you truly believe God is good? See, Job wanted to know why all this was going on. Maybe Job wanted to know if God can stop this, if God can prevent this, why doesn't He do something about it? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know. But we know God invites us to trust Him. God points to the heavens. God points to creation and the animals. And God says, you can trust me. We may not understand now, but we can trust Him. And this is where it becomes a real issue for people in God. People have control issues. We want to control our little piece of the universe. We think, I've got this handled. I don't need anybody else. I've got this. Really? Do you? No, you don't. Did you see that zoom on space? Oh my goodness, we're in control of nothing. We exercise like we're going to live forever. We eat like we'll avoid every health problem. We gain knowledge like we'll eventually learn it all. We entertain ourselves thinking we'll truly be happy. We worry about the economy and politics and the future. And we do start to wonder if we can handle it. No, you can't handle it. It's time to quit deceiving yourself, and it's time for me to quit deceiving myself. It's time we quit operating like we're in control, and we learn to trust God. And so my prayer for you today is when life seems to be spinning out of control, as it was for Job, I pray that you would see God clearly. That you would see that He has handled the heavens, that He has handled all creation, and He'll take care of you as well. And so whether you have a special needs child, or a season in your marriage where you're not connecting, or whether you're going through financial struggles, or dead-end jobs, or broken relationships, or anger issues, or depression, as you're hit with the difficulties of COVID and they only get harder, I pray that you will see God is in control and that God is good. I pray that you would willingly turn the control of your life over to Him, because you can't handle it and I can't handle it. But all of creation testifies there is a God who can handle it. So what did Job conclude? I perhaps think this is the most important verse in the entire book of Job. It comes from chapter 42, verse 5. Job says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes had seen you. After God speaks, Job says, I'd heard about you before, and I thought I knew you, but now I know you like I've never known you before. I think of people who go to church when it's convenient, or they read that daily Bible verse on Facebook and think they've done their part, or they occasionally pray here and there. Those are people who hear about God. But what separates them from the committed believer seeks to see God consistently. Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. David put it this way in Psalm 34, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. 1 Peter writes, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Do you believe that's true? Do you believe there's a creator out there who not only created the cosmos, but He cares about and loves you? If you don't believe it, then ask the woodpecker, the water spider, the reindeer. Look to the heavens. And here's what Jesus had to say about it. Not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. So for the last time, I'm going to ask the question again. If God can, then why doesn't He? If God can prevent the pain, if God can stop the pain, why doesn't He do it? Well, I want you to notice God doesn't try to explain to Job why all this is happening. He doesn't sit Job down and say, okay, Job, pull up a chair, let's talk about it. Here was my plan. A, here's where it started, and then B, here's where it went, and C, here's where it's going. God doesn't do that for a few reasons, the mainly being Job couldn't understand it. It wouldn't make sense to Job in his own little world. It wouldn't make sense to us in our own little world. But instead, God asked Job to see His power on display. Look to the heavens. Look to the animals. Look to creation. God says, Job, do you know how many snowflakes are going to fall this year? I've got it covered. Don't worry. Why don't you leave some things to me up here? It's that control issue. God makes it clear that He is in control, but He willingly wants us to participate in giving that control over to Him. So why does God ask all these questions of Job? Is it to show He's smarter? You know, I'm smarter than you are. You know, He said that at some point, I'm sure. No, I don't think so. I think God asks these questions to make it clear that the message all around of creation is God cares. God cares, and God is willing to carry the things we can't carry. Reminds me of the story I heard about a young girl. She was 8 years old, and she asked her dad while they were riding the train on a trip. She said, "Dad, what is sex sin?" And this kind of threw him off, as such a young child would ask such a big question. And he didn't answer it right away, but the train stopped as they got to the station, and he took his luggage down off the rack. It was a big, heavy suitcase without wheels, and he said, "Honey, would you please carry the suitcase?" And she went to pick it up, and it was too heavy. She's like, "Dad, it's too heavy for me. I can't carry it." He said, "Yes, it is, and I would be a very poor father if I asked you to carry something that was too heavy for you." It's the same way with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you're older and stronger, you'll be able to understand that, and I can teach you about it. But for now, you must trust me to carry it for you. There are some things that we can't carry, and God invites us to trust Him. God says, "Look, you can't handle that kind of knowledge. You can't handle that situation, but I can. Trust me." And in Job's life, God did some amazing things. He repaid him. He doubled all of his wealth. He was given 10 more kids. And that may not be the story of your life, okay? I want you to understand that when God repays you, it may not be in this life. It may take getting to heaven to experience the full joy of God's repayment. But when you start to read the Bible and you understand what heaven is, it's well worth the wait. The good news is, in this life, when you're going through a painful season, Psalm 22 says, God has not abandoned the brokenhearted. God has not abandoned the suffering. He has not ignored their cries, but He's listened to them. When life is hard, I want you to realize God is good. Back in 1992, there was a picture taken by the Hubble telescope that answered the question, what is at the center of our galaxy? For many years, people thought at the center of our galaxy, that the Earth was at the center of the galaxy. But we've seen some pictures like this one, that show us we are not at the center at all. And so as the worship team joins me on stage, I want to show you this very interesting couple of photographs that Hubble took. So they speculated for years, and they were correct. They just didn't have the evidence at the time, that at the center of our galaxy was a black hole. And in turn, that's exactly what it was. It was a black hole. And so they were trying to zoom in to see what's in a black hole. Because, you know, it's this vacuum and there's nothing there. But they actually thought there might be something there. And so they zoomed in. And this is the picture that they were able to take with the Hubble telescope. Now, Stephen Conister says that those are two dust rings circling a nucleus at the center of a black hole. And that may be true. And maybe I'm just a preacher here, but you know what it looks like to me, don't you? It looks an awful lot like a cross. And if there was ever a time in human history that it seemed like life was out of control, or that God was, that He had lost the reins, it was when His Son went to the cross. This seemed to be a clear indication that whatever control God had was gone. God's Son nailed to a cross. The disciples didn't understand it. Mary didn't understand it. No one understood it at the time. Yet the cross, instead of being an indictment that God was not in control, was actually the clearest picture of God's control we've ever seen. The cross sends the message that when life seems out of control, God knows what He's doing. God put an arm around Job and said, look, if I can, why don't I? Look up, look around, and look in, and trust me. That's why Jesus said, not a single sparrow falls to the ground without your Father's knowledge. You're worth more than a whole flock of sparrows. This morning, if you have pain, this morning, if you're going through a difficult season, if you don't understand, there's a God who does. And He invites you to trust your life to Him this morning. If you have a decision to make, you meet me down front as we stand and as we sing.